going to be anything in the way of a didactic kind of presentation. I've put together what I believe is an outstanding panel group here. And we are here essentially for you to discuss questions you may have, being that it's now February. I suspect most of you are quite a ways through this process already. So I think it'll be a useful session and likely very well timed for you all. My disclosure is that I'm on my second job, which either makes me good at this or not good at this, depending on how you want to look at it. But I think I have some insight that I can certainly share if need be, but I think our panelists will be the most valuable. And I just want to provide a little context. I think you've all probably heard this before. 50% or maybe 75% of all orthopedic surgeons change jobs before the 5-year mark of their onset of employment. And that's typically somewhere between 2 and 5 years, unless major disaster is struck. And that's typically because, we have to be in a job for 2 years before you can successfully pass part 2 of your boards. On top of that, orthopedic oncology surgeons have fewer potential opportunities. I think we all know our market is just a little bit tighter than those that our colleagues enjoy in other specialties. So that's kind of the framework, which you're all well aware. And so when you're considering that, why would you change a job? And I think this is a helpful thing to consider when you're considering how do you successfully select your first job and negotiate your first job. And so I think that is sort of a helpful framework to think about it. And there's reasons that one might change a job. And some of those reasons are a feeling of a push from your current institution and things that may be not going so well, or potentially a pull from a potential future institution and things that might attract you to leave what might be otherwise a very good situation. And so these are just some of the examples of things that can be either pushes or pulls, and some of them definitely overlap depending on how you think about it. And there's actually an interesting article written on this topic by Dr. Simone in '99, and that's in the Journal of Cancer. So I encourage you all to take a look at that article if you're interested. And so we don't always get this right the first time, as the statistics would show. And there's multiple articles written on this topic, and if you look at how people select their first job or subsequent jobs, these are kind of some of the things that people rank as importance. And as you can see, this is a ranking of importance, and I think it's either interesting or not interesting to compare your own priorities to how this group of over 150 people ranked that. And I think another important thing to consider is what does our job look like when we first get out there? And this was an article done by some young investigators just a few years ago, looking at, as one metric, how much tumor surgery are we doing as orthopedic oncologists early on in our practice. I think one of the major satisfiers that we all consider is, do we have sort of the practice that we envisioned when we were in fellowship or leaving fellowship? And one of those things certainly is, how much oncologic surgery are we doing? And this article kind of nicely outlines what's the reality. And so this is a good thing, I think, to look at in terms of framing your expectations for a potential first job. And of course, the practice setting that you find yourself in and sort of the mentorship model that you have going into that, those things all play into it. This isn't, take this with a grain of salt, but this is, I think, certainly useful information to frame your mind as you select that job. In the interest of time, I won't go into these Simone's maxims, which is what, the article that I had mentioned before. But this is these are items or major categories that I think are helpful to think about as you select your job. So the institution, the leadership model, how you're recruited, and what does success look like in your future job. And so again, I point you to this article. I'd be happy to discuss questions about this during the panel part of the discussion, but I don't want to manipulate too much time here. So with that being said, this is the panel that we have, and this is the reason that they've been chosen. And I'm excited that we can all be here for you to sort of serve as a resource for questions that you probably have at this stage, being February, pretty much exactly halfway through your fellowship. Dr. Mark Scarborough from the University of Florida, former chairman of the University of Florida, but certainly a wealth of experience in that role. We have Dr. Zach Burke, my new partner at Cleveland Clinic, who is serving in the role as the new hire. Zach, how long have you been with us now?
About 8 days.
Okay, so far so good.
To be precise, it's fantastic. Yeah. Everything I dreamed and more.
So far so good. We have Brooke Crawford, Dr. Crawford, who is at the University of Miami, and she is serving in the recent move role. She recently switched institutions from UCLA to Miami, so she can shed some light on that. And then last but definitely not least, we have Laura Lauth, who knows more about this than any of us, I think, from a legal perspective and a negotiation perspective as a contract attorney. So with that said, I would like to turn it over to Laura. I will stop sharing my screen, and you can share the information that you wanted to share first.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
We can.
Okay, let me... make sure I can share. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, can you see that?
Perfect, yep.
Okay. Here we go. This is my quick disclaimer. Obviously, no attorney-client relationship is formed by virtue of you guys participating in this discussion. And the information I'm about to share is obviously not legal advice and is just for educational purposes only. So the way that I've arranged things is I'm going to just sort of go through what I see in my experience as the most common sort of pitfalls, or, you might frame it as mistakes that physicians often make, or some common misconceptions that I see most often in this setting. And I should start by saying that, like Lukas said, I am a contract attorney. I work exclusively on behalf of physicians doing the review, analysis, and negotiation of physician employment agreements. So that's why I feel great about talking to you guys about this. And I'm happy to share, the sort of expertise that I have learned along the way, because I know that you guys don't get this type of instruction in really any other setting throughout your training. So what I will start with here, hire an appropriate attorney. So that means someone who is specifically experienced in physician employment agreements. Any old attorney might be able to point out a couple things in your contract that might look askew or, not the most favorable, but unless they have reviewed, hundreds upon hundreds of physician employment agreements, they're not going to know what's standard, what's not, what's ugly about it, what's not, what we like to see, all the things that really only come from that type of specific experience. And when you're hiring that attorney, I want you to be sure that you understand, in advance how they are going to bill you, how are they going to charge you. I personally do my contract review and analysis on a flat rate fee basis. Most attorneys work for an hourly rate. That's what you guys are most commonly probably used to if working with an attorney in any sort of realm. Hopefully they can give you an idea up front of what you should anticipate paying them when it's all said and done. And equally important to how much you're going to pay them is what the lawyer will do for you precisely. I know that a lot of attorneys that do this type of work often limit the scope of their review and analysis, or they'll only look at certain provisions of the contract. So you want to know if that's the case up front, or whether you can anticipate a comprehensive review of the contract. Here are just a couple of bullet points about, the offer process, just for people who might be curious or not familiar. Usually an offer is extended after the interview process, a successful interview process, of course. When I use the term agreement, I'm using that interchangeably with the term contract. In my experience, most often the employment offers are just emailed to the physician, just forwarded on, and they might come with a deadline. And I'm using that word in quotes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Common pitfall number 2. I want all physicians to feel confident in the decision to hire an attorney if that's what you want to do. I don't want anyone feeling any sort of shame with that process. And I always point out to people, keep in mind that employment agreements are comprehensive, they are legally binding, and they are, of course, written by a lawyer. And the lawyer who wrote that contract didn't write it with your interests in mind. They're thinking only of the employer. Here in italics is some example language. I often see language, similar to this in physician contracts. It's basically a way for employers to sort of do a little CYA saying, we told you that you can and should seek your own independent legal counsel throughout this process. And I will tell you also that if you are experiencing a situation on the flip side of this, where you are being, sort of discouraged from seeking legal counsel, then I would certainly consider that a red flag. And even in a situation where the agreement, the contract is communicated to you as entirely non-negotiable, I would say you nonetheless, you need to know what the contract says, what it means for you, what are the associated repercussions with it, what is expected of you, all of that. Even if you're not going to have one word in that contract negotiated or changed, it's really important to know what it says and what it means for you. Back to the deadline issue, I very commonly speak with physicians who say, I got this job offer, but they want it signed and returned to them by X date. And I say, don't feel anxious when you're given that type of, time frame or deadline. This is a very significant decision that you're going to be making, and you should take, ample time to consider it and consult the appropriate professionals. So that might be hiring an attorney, that also might be speaking with a financial planner if, the compensation structure or other payments being made to you are really complex, things like that. What I always tell people is just ask them to go ahead and formally extend the deadline. And in my experience, they definitely will do so. Pitfall number 3, be on alert. Obviously, you want to be, aware of what the contract says throughout, but there are some contract provisions that are much more impactful and significant than others. The termination provisions, in my opinion, are huge, just because of the repercussions attached to them. Often termination provisions are directly tied to other provisions of the contract. So a little bit of background, in physician employment agreements, virtually every single one will have without cause termination rights for both the physician and the employer. And then we'll also have for cause termination rights. So how that contract terminates, whether without cause or for cause, is going to bring into play other issues. So for instance, the non-compete, oftentimes, and this is a favorable approach, the non-compete will only be impactful to you. You will only be bounded by it if the contract terminates for a reason that is in your control. So you are terminated for cause, like you did something wrong that they can specifically point to, or you are the one deciding to leave. Other things are tail coverage, who's going to pay for your tail coverage if that is required upon termination, and then repayments of signing bonuses and starting bonuses. Often these will be directly triggered by the manner in which the contract terminates. So you want to pay attention to what those provisions state and you know what they really mean. Here are just a couple other items, just sort of the big ticket things to be on the lookout for. I already mentioned med mal coverage. You do need to know what type of policy is going to be in place and whether tail coverage is required. And if you do need that tail coverage, who is going to pay for it? That can be a very significant expense. So it's really important to know upfront. Compensation, obviously, you know, maybe the most important aspect of the contract for a lot of people. How is the compensation structured? Are you just getting a straight base salary, or is it going to be entirely productivity based, or some combination of both? And is it competitive with what, you know, other folks that do what you do out there are seeing? For me, that means looking at the MGMA data. There are a couple other physician compensated data resources out there. They're not just available to the public though. It's a subscription-based service that I pay for with my business. So that can be really helpful when, you know, hiring a professional to help you navigate the process. And again, termination provisions are huge for me. Number 4, I want people to think realistically and logically about your day-to-day life. So practice locations are another big one for me, because I have seen a lot of sort of nightmare situations in this regard. I want people to know exactly where and when they are expected to provide services. And if it's an employer that has multiple locations, you know, maybe they have clinic locations throughout the state that you're working in, you don't want to be in a position where suddenly you're expected to serve a clinic that's an hour drive away from your house, something that you had never contemplated when you initially went to work for these people. Equipment, supplies, support staff, everything like that. You probably know what you're going to need to be able to do your job and fulfill all of your duties under the agreement. What are you going to need to do your job the most effectively, efficiently, and be the most productive? There often are things sort of verbally promised or guaranteed throughout the interview process. So if there's anything like that, you know, make sure it's in the contract. And then professional activities outside of the agreement, you know, so many folks are doing various things outside of their primary employment, as, you know, income generating activities. So first of all, does your contract let you do that? Second of all, will you be able to retain the income you earn from it if you do so? So by that, I'm not referring simply to like moonlighting, things like that, or a plethora of other professional activities you could engage in. Being a consultant, you know, serving as an expert witness, research, or in doing speaking engagements, everything like that. Number 5, this is obviously very general, but I just do want to harp on it. Don't be afraid to ask for the things that you want or that you need. You do not know the answer unless you ask. And I also like to point out, you know, obviously employers, it's not good business to offer you the world, right off the bat. They're not going to give you everything right up front. You might have to ask for a few things. And people are often pretty hesitant to ask for things. They don't want to come across as greedy. They don't want to ruffle any feathers, just generally don't feel comfortable. But, I always remind people you can do it in a very polite and respectful manner and just simply communicate, why XYZ would be helpful and appreciated. So things that I commonly see offered that I would encourage asking for is relocation expense reimbursement. That could obviously be incredibly helpful to any individual or family that's moving for a job. Other expense reimbursement things to think about are board certification. I know a lot of people do prep courses that they might have to travel for. You have to pay for books, things like that. And then student loan debt, maybe they have a program in place that could help you on that front. And it might not be offered to you right off the bat. So you just have to ask. If a signing or starting bonus is not offered to you up front, I would certainly encourage asking for that as well. Specifically, for fellowship trained surgeons, that is something, I'm very accustomed to seeing. And again, you just don't know what they are willing to give you unless you ask for it. This is my sixth, and I think it's the final pitfall I've outlined here: negotiate wisely. So you might have a list of 25 items long that in your perfect world would be adjusted and negotiated in your favor. Obviously, that's not a great way to go about business. So it's really important to set out your priorities and figure out which points are the most important to you and which would actually be deal breakers. What would make you actually walk away from this offer, and know that up front. And then on the other hand, knowing which points are gives, which ones are you entirely willing to, compromise completely on and not worry about. And one example I've pointed out here, I often have physicians tell me, if this job doesn't work out for whatever reason, I would never live in this city otherwise. I know I would move to my hometown or whatever the case may be. So if that's your situation, then obviously you should not waste any time or effort negotiating the non-compete, because it won't be an issue for you upon termination if you know that you're going to move regardless. Here I've listed, I'll just let you guys take a look through yourself. These are some horror stories as I've framed them. These are provisions that I have personally seen in physician employment agreements. Some of them, are more egregious than others, but all of them, pretty unsettling contract terms to have a physician be bound by. So these are all, relatively common and things to certainly look out for when you're going through an employment agreement. And I'm happy to share any aspect of this later. And that's it.
That was very helpful. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm sure
Absolutely.
that the group got a lot out of that.
Great.
So if you guys want to just pay attention to Laura's contact information there, if you have any need to reach out to her, that's there for you. Laura, what states do you practice in?
I'm based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm also licensed in Illinois. We actually serve clients throughout the entire country. Actually, if we have state-specific issues that require us to consult with local co-counsel, we do so at no additional expense to our clients. So we serve people throughout the country.
That's great. So in theory, you could potentially help anyone here, on a professional basis if you had to.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you again. If you maybe want to stop sharing your screen, then we can see the whole group here. And let's open it up to the fellows. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion, and so I'm happy to start moderating that. Does anybody have anything they want to start with?
Luke, I'm gonna ask a question now that my microphone's working, and I want to thank everyone on the panel for your time. You're awesome. I'll ask you guys, what do you wish you had put in a contract that you didn't, or what mistakes did you make in your own contracts? Or, for Dr. Scarborough, some tips on contracts that things he may have wished he had put in contract with faculty that didn't, and so forth.
Yeah, so I'm going to go through just a couple slides in a few minutes for mine that'll give like the philosophy and some of those questions.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Do you want me to do that now, or do you want me to just answer questions? Because I like 4 or 5 slides or 6 slides.
Yeah, why don't you go for it? And
all right,
that was a great question to get it started off. So,
can you see them?
We can see part of it.
Only part of it, huh?
Yeah, there we go. Now I got it.
Okay, so it says faculty success.
Yep.
Cool. So I've had, I think, 4 chairs that have been my chair. Then I've been chair for the last 12 years. And fortunately, I turned over the chair. Am I still on there? Because it's making weird noises.
Yeah, I think you're back.
Okay, cool. Good. All right. So one thing you need to do is make sure that your expectation of what you're going to be doing matches with what your job is, right? So these are the domains: clinical, academic.
I don't know if I'm the only one, but I cannot see your screen.
We lost them when we lost you for a second there, Mark.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. No problem.
Share my screen again. Sorry. Share screen.
It's that Florida backdrop that's getting you.
Well, I guess it booted me out. Here we go. Should be on. Share screen, blah, blah, blah. How about now? Did it show up?
Yep.
All right, so domain. So when you get a job, you want to just make sure that it fits what you anticipate doing, right? So and that your expectations of what you're doing is the expectations of what what the job is. Is it still showing? Because
yeah, we can see it. You're not in presentation mode, but we can see it. Oh, and it went away for a sec now.
Weird. Still gone?
Still gone.
All right.
We got you back.
You see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. So match your job and make sure your expectations of what you're doing is what they expect. And many people doing orthopedic oncology are going to be having multiple clinical roles. And you need to make sure you understand the FTE assignment. So how much of your work is clinical, how much is education, how much is academic, to make sure that's matched. This is really the key philosophically to being successful, is to being available. And that means show up, participate, go to grand rounds, take care of research and education, work with your residents, et cetera. You need to have good skills, technically, socially, surgically, et cetera. And you need to be affable. You need to be nice to your coworkers, to your patients, to your family, to yourself. And those are really the keys. And if you do all of that, you're going to be great. You'll do well. This is actually my favorite slide. This is the productivity versus behavior slide. And there's really kind of 4 main quadrants. And you can think about it. The superstar is going to be the person who is productive. And I don't mean just clinically productive. I mean productive educationally, research, service, whatever. And they're very productive, but also are nice and get along with everybody. And people love that person. Those are called your superstars. In the contrast are the people that their behavior is not that great. They're kind of mean. They're not very productive. And ideally, as a chair, you call those your former employees. That's really kind of the place you want them to be. Most people hover in the good productivity, in the good behavior and the moderate productivity. So they're pretty productive, but their behavior is good. So most people are actually in this upper corner. Then the most problematic to the chair and the person you don't want to be is the super productive person, but it's just kind of mean or needy or, angry physician or something. So you don't want to be that person. And those are important to the department often because they bring a lot of money, but they're super difficult to manage. Startup packages, goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It kind of depends on where you are and how big the institution is and really what the flexibility is. I think the most important thing to be happy is making sure that the roles that you need are going to be fulfilled. You clearly need somebody to help navigate these difficult patients. So patient navigator and coordinators, and then you need some kind of support, resident fellow, APP support, admin support, and research support. But you shouldn't expect that you're going to get that the day you get there. But you need to, if you're joining a group like Zach is joining the Cleveland Clinic with Luke and everything, there's already a system there, and they have a lot of those things already in place. You'll need incremental increase of those resources as you ramp up, but don't expect them to give you 3 coordinators, an APP, 4 residents, and 4 days off the day you get there. It doesn't work that way. But if it's a group that doesn't have a really active oncology program, you need to really have this conversation before you get started and then ongoing with not only the chair or the chief, but also with their business manager, and keep them up to date on where you are in your ramp up. Because you want the resources to show up when you need them. But you also have to expect that you need to build your practice to get the resources, not that they're going to throw them at you, unless you happen to have an incredibly great program that you're joining that just has so many resources they can throw them at you. We don't need to go through these, but there are compensation tables as you join a practice. This is the AAMC tables, and if you get a lawyer, they can help you understand them. Compensation, sorry if this is a little bit blurry, but compensation is not the most important thing, and I would suggest it's probably way low on the list. Much more important is that you have the resources you want. You're in a place that you like. Your partners are good. You're happy. Your family's likes where you are. You're professionally advancing, etc. But compensation, it is important. This is just a table that shows compensation versus productivity. And, if you're super productive and you're well compensated, you're happy and your chair loves you, your hospital loves you. If you are well compensated and not that productive, you're a bit of a anchor to your department. And if you're not compensated well and you're super productive, you're not going to be happy, right? So it's important to be kind of be in the right spot in the box, and also understand where you are. That if you're highly compensated and you're not productive, you're not a great fit. So just have some self-awareness there. And then finally, my last slide is just this work-life balance thing. You want to be present. You want to work hard. You want to advance your career, but you also have a life. It's important for your family, your friends, yourself, but also balancing your job, career, and really making sure you get this right. People mess this up frequently in all different directions. Either they can't let go of their job, or they're going to just do so much just so they make more money to the detriment of their family, themselves, their health, etc. So don't be that person. Get that balance right. Work hard, have fun, and the jobs out there are great. Just try to make sure that it's really a fit and that you like what you're doing. And don't get hung up just on the dollars. That's like the least important thing. I can guarantee you're going to be able to afford a house, a car, probably be able to go to Whole Foods rather than Publix, which is our local grocery store, if you want, and you may even get to go on vacation. All right, that's it.
Thanks, Mark. And I think that I have a question to maybe get things started off that I think ties into the one that Ginger asked also, because, and I've run into this in my personal experience, and I'm sure that others have as well. You talked about having the resources there for when you need them, not necessarily day one. Laura brought up the point of this stuff has to be written into the contract. Otherwise you're not gonna, you might not get it. How do you, and you've got experience in this from a chair's perspective, how do you reconcile those two things? Do you write things into contracts that, based on sort of incremental performance, or take a stab at that question, I guess.
Yeah, so let me give a background. I've hired probably, I don't know, 40, 50 people. I've fired one, and I've had a handful leave for all kinds of reasons, right? Very few because they didn't get what they needed when they needed it, or eventually. What we can deliver and when we can deliver depends on lots of different things. And I think the most important thing is knowing what's the track record of the group and the people hiring you, rather than having a formula that says, okay, I see, do 9,000 RVs, I get 1.2 PAs or something like that. And talk, and that's where you need to talk to the partners. And it's a lot of this is trust. I think the more you can get up front, the better. It's harder if you're building something and they don't understand orthopedic oncology. So if you're starting a job and they say, hey, we're going to start an orthopedic oncology job, and they have no idea that these are complicated patients that need a patient navigator or something, then it might take a long time to make that case for that. And then be creative. Think about how can you get resources from other sources. So from a cancer center, from the team approach, because orthopedic oncology is different than hand surgery. So many of those other subspecialties of orthopedics are kind of freestanding. Orthopedic oncology, we deal more with the radiation therapists and the pathologists than I do with my hand surgeons, literally. And so you need to kind of understand that. But a lot of this is some trust. I don't know if many people have gotten formulaic delivery things. I think some of the things Laura said are absolutely spot on, with making sure you get your relocation costs, make sure you really understand what is the contract. I think that educational part that the attorney assistants can give you maybe as important as anything. At the University of Florida, our contracts are, we have 1,500 faculty or something. So you're not going to rewrite the language of the contract. You might be able to tweak the sign-on bonus. You might be able to make sure you understand some of these things, but you're not going to completely rewrite the non-compete clause that's standard language for every person hired in our institution. So to me, the value of the legal support is much education to the person getting the jobs and anything. Really kind of understand, what are you signing? What am I agreeing to? I think that's super important. So I don't know if I went on. Did that answer the question sort of?
Yeah, I think so. Looks like Julia has a question.
Yeah, I have a question. So I've actually heard from some people not to try and negotiate if you're in a big hospital system like University of Florida or something, because all of the contracts are pretty much pre-made and they'll kind of laugh at you, and this is just a general contract that everybody signs. So don't really even try to negotiate. And especially I think the pressure as going into oncology where the jobs are scarce, it makes me worried to try and negotiate because the jobs are scarce. So from a chair's perspective at a big institution, is that still something that we should try and negotiate and talk to them about and kind of go from there?
I think you need to negotiate your schedule and also kind of understand what resources you'll have, and if they're not provided up front, what you might need in a year. It'd be nice to have like a anticipated timeline. If you join Luke, or if you join, the University of Florida, where we already have a very active big service, it's incremental. It's really not, you're not, it's less important to have all that completely ironed out. But if you're in a startup group, you need to understand, okay, I'm going to need a PA. I may get a half PA now. I may get a full PA later. And you need to know your schedule. And part of that is really back to the thing of what is your role. And somebody the year before for 390, and then you hire you, and let's say you say, well, I need 425. That means I would have to go back and up the salary for everybody the last couple of years, more than the normal increase in kind of market rate. So it's just not. It kind of depends on the system too. One more comment on salary and compensation is, if you understand one model, you understand one model. And they also change. So more importantly than knowing what the dollar amount you're going to make is, well, how is that calculated? What are the expectations of it? And also make sure you look at the cost of living adjustments by geographic location, because there's super big ranges if you live in New York City versus live in Topeka.
Perfect. Laura, any comments on negotiating at really large institutions?
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in there to Mark's point about understanding the compensation structure. Like you said, it can be done in so many different ways. Every entity in practice does it differently. What is included in overhead, there's so many different factors to keep in mind. So one thing that I always tell people that you can use in any setting is to ask for a sample calculation. Just say, hey, can you please share with me a redacted sample calculation from someone else who does exactly what I do from last year. So you can see the exact breakdown of how your compensation is going to be calculated. And a coinciding issue with that is to ask, how transparent are you guys with productivity reports or whatever other information you can share with me, so that I can see what I'm producing, what I'm doing, and verify for myself whether I'm being compensated appropriately. To the question about negotiating in an academic setting, for an academic institution, the scope of negotiations are going to be much more limited. Like Mark said, they're not going to change the wording of the contract probably for any one physician. It's just not going to happen. But there are certain tweaks that will be made. Like he mentioned, you might get a little increase on your sign-on bonus. They might consider relocation expense reimbursement, whereas it wasn't, offered to you up front. Another thing that I do often see, generally in an academic setting, the contract is going to contain a provision, or they might have an entirely separate policy governing intellectual property, saying, anything that you develop or produce or conceive of while you are an employee of ours, that will be our property. All right, title, and interest to that will be assigned to us. What I have seen successfully negotiated is excluding certain things from that. So for instance, if a physician is already working on something, or, basically has intellectual property already in the works, I do see that being excluded from, super restrictive and comprehensive intellectual property policies.
Laura, how binding is an email? Let's say you have a contract, but then you email back and forth with the chair, and in an email they promise you, sure, you can have, outside of the contract, you can have a PA, you can have this, that, and the other.
Yeah, I see that a lot. It's not going to be legally binding, and to be honest, who's going to take this type of thing to court and actually challenge it just from a pragmatic perspective. But again, to Mark's point, I often tell clients there is some element of trust there, because there are instances where employers have very good reasons for not including certain items in the contract. Just one example, I recently had a client who was guaranteed a dedicated PA, and he wanted it written into the contract, and that's something that I would advise as well, like I mentioned. But from the employer's perspective, they said, we don't feel comfortable writing that into the contract, because what if we have to fire that PA and then you all of a sudden don't have an assigned PA, and then we are then in breach of the agreement, and then you could terminate, and there's all these other repercussions associated with that. So there are good reasons and understandable reasons why an employer might be hesitant to include certain things. And if they are, going to the extent of, in a written format, making promises and guarantees to you, I tell clients that, I hope you can take their word and trust it. And I think I don't know if it was Mark or Lukas that mentioned this, the best way to gauge, what an employment setting is going to be like is to speak with people who are already there. How do you feel supported? Do you get the resources that you need? Are you happy? All of these are really important questions to just ask people who are already there. And that's the best way to really gauge your expectations.
Yeah, as an employer, chair, or whatever, we want to hire people and support them and make them productive and give them the resources that they need when they can. That being said, resources are limited. They're not unlimited, at least. And it often gets out of whack when the expectation of the person is out of balance with what they're actually doing, right? So if they think, hey, I need a full-time PA and 2 residents, and they're just not doing much, or they're in the lab all the time or something, then it's not really realistic. Or they think they need it before they actually get busy enough to need it. So you have to have a little bit of introspection, and there's a lot of trust both ways. So.
Oh,
Devin, you're on mute.
Hey, quick question. Private equity. So one, what are kind of y'all's general thoughts on it? And two, if we are talking to a private practice that claims they are not in communications with private equity, but with the recent upswing in private equity deals, should we try and negotiate in our contract some sort of protection if they do get bought out by private equity before we were to become partner or anything?
Laura, I have no idea, other than I've heard bad things about private equity groups. So the local group in Gainesville has been bought twice, and there's been a huge efflux of people. So,
Laura, you're on mute still.
Yeah, so that type of issue isn't going to be really of concern to you, or even, capable of having your input right off the bat, because if you're joining a private practice, what you're going to do is initially just sign an employment agreement. And what that employment agreement will likely state is that after, a specified amount of time, usually 2 years, you will be considered, for shareholder status. And then if and when the practice decides to offer you that, then your employment agreement goes out the window, and then you're going to be bound by a totally separate shareholder agreement, which in 99.9% of circumstances is actually going to be entirely non-negotiable. So you're not really in a position to have any real bargaining power when it comes to those types of terms.
But should we ask for some sort of accelerated shareholder access? If we're in our second year of associateship and they're about to sell it to private practice, should we ask for protection to be made a shareholder before the sale so we can at least benefit from that sale? Or are we just out of luck?
It never hurts to ask, like I say, I'm just hesitant to, make any strong statements about it, because in my experience in employers, it's just very black and white. the shareholder situation, it's always left, in the employer's sole discretion. There are no guarantees or assurances made up front. So, whether to ask about that, what they would consider in terms of accelerating it, if they're being, transparent with you and that that's coming, that would certainly make sense.
Okay, thanks.
Paco, do you have a question?
I do, thank you. This is sort of a question, I think, both for Dr. Scarborough and Laura. So my contract, it's an academic contract, and there was absolutely no leeway for negotiation. I asked for more money, by the way, so I got literally laughed at by my chairman, which is awesome. But the one thing that's actually written in my contract is like a breakdown of my time of 10% at this hospital, 10% at this other hospital, 70% at the main, at the big house, what have you. But in conversation with the chairman, and this is where I did my residency, so there is a fair bit of trust already. He was like, because ultimately how I make bonus and stuff is tied to these percent where I generate these revenues from. He's like, don't really worry about it too much, kid. Like, we'll see how it shapes up, and if you're more productive elsewhere, we'll kind of shift you that way and stuff like that. But technically, the contract is a 3-year contract, and it's written out, with very discrete percentages. Is this one of those things where if you're mutually just kind of making things work and happy with it, you just kind of let things slide and just be reasonable about it? Or, ultimately, if it's not written, it can go south. I mean, I'm sure anything could go south, especially with me, an onc.
Laura, do you want to answer first?
Sure. That's definitely a unique situation. I don't think I've ever seen a contract that had, percentages of time outlined like that, and then had the coinciding, compensation and dependent on where you earned the revenue. So that's very unique for me. And I think it would be a little bit of a cause for concern if you don't know, where they're ultimately going to have you serving. That, of course, that would impact your compensation. So, it might be the type of thing where they want it written that way, but perhaps you could ask for a way in which you could terminate if you are not in agreement with how the compensation is approached after X amount of time.
So I'll give a slightly different answer. I think it needs to be a trust thing, and you can, by understanding the practice, at least understand what the choices are, or where the places are, and whether that makes sense. If you're going to be practicing in a town and they might be sending you 2 hours away or something that's really egregious, then yeah, that's really going to make a difference. If it's a slightly different hospital around, then that's maybe a bit different. One of my partners was in a system where he had to go to multiple places each day or each week. And that's just hard. It's hard to do. So you don't want to get spread too thin. But you may have some outside things that are useful to you, useful to your practice. So I think, yeah, and it also changes all the time. And there's mergers and acquisitions and things that grow and things that shrink. So I don't think you can get too granular on exactly what percentage of time you're going to spend at X versus Y.
Play it by ear, and maybe then get it in writing later. Probably also get laughed at.
Well, it's 9:05 Eastern time. I do want to be respectful of folks' time. Are there other questions though before we sign off? Anybody have anything burning that they'd like to get answered?
Hey, I didn't hear anything from Zach as far as, does he like his new partner?
The best around.
Too early to tell.
I think that's probably the safest answer.
Brooke,
Thanks,
do you have any
everybody.
thoughts on Brooke, do you have thoughts on new jobs, contracts and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, the contract stuff. I mean, I actually did something similar with a lawyer, similar to Laura, who had a flat rate. And so even though I was my first job was like semi-academic, and then my next two were very academic, I had someone read them both before and after on the first two to make sure that I understood everything that was going down. So I think that was the big key for me, because they were also sort of non-negotiable in terms of some of the stuff we're talking about. But I will say with my first contract, just in negotiating and talking to the recruiter and the contract lawyer, I did end up with a big signing bonus for that institution because I asked. I didn't say anything like, I need this amount, but I said, this was the other offer I had that was higher. I'm not saying I need that, but just so you're understanding the price range that I'm looking at as I'm trying to decide.
Yes, signing bonuses and relocation costs are one-time costs, so they're not an ongoing cost. So, if you have a particular expensive move or something, you should ask. Okay.
One thing I would add really quickly, I don't know if anybody out there on the fellow side is considering research as more than a small part of their expected job and contract, but if you are, I think there are a lot of independent considerations as you're going through the process, and maybe not something we should cover here, but I'd recommend you either reach out to your mentors who have done that, or I'm happy to answer based on my experience. You can, I don't know if our emails are on there, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat about it.
Yeah, it's a good point, because that's a complete different twist to the contract. All of it, everything is pertinent to it, but it adds another, depending on what the percent effort is, a different deal. And again, it's aligning expectations, both yours and the institutional's expectations. Well, Luke, thanks for organizing, and Ginger and everybody else.
Yeah, Zach and Brooke, Mark, Laura, thank you so much. Lucas, thanks for putting everything together. We have another meeting in a month that's going to be the medical legal aspects of orthopedic oncology, and whether that's you being a plaintiff, defendant, or being an expert witness. We're going to cover all that stuff. But thank you all for your time. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Rafi, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I thought next session is the teaching, how to educate
it's
residents.
Teaching. Rafi's right. I was, seeing if you were paying attention.
Nice one. Good to see everybody.
Even better. You'll be getting your emails, and I hope this Zoom format was better for you guys to be able to kind of talk, ask questions, see each other.
This is great. Thanks for doing this, Ginger. I think this is fantastic. So
thank you all for your time so much.
Yeah.
Mark, next time we're going to spend an hour having you tell Bill Enneking stories.
That'd
be a good session.
Right?
All right.
Yeah. Next time. Thank you.
All right.
Bye, guys.